So the last lecture for part 3 is on early childhood psychosocial development. So now we're going to talk about things in the mental health and social arena that make early childhood such an important period. One of the things that happens is the ability to emotionally regulate, to control when and how emotions are expressed. Up to this point, it's been very difficult because the limbic system and prefrontal cortex really haven't been connected. And this may be one of the most important psychosocial accomplishments during this 2 to 6-year-old period. Up to this point, this required effortful control. That is, it wasn't just something that came naturally, but it took effort to do that. Some of the other highlights of this time period include Erikson's third stage of psychosocial development, initiative versus guilt, where a child undertakes new skills and activities and feels guilty when they don't succeed at them. Remember, this is also the time period where Freud talked about anal development. So one of the biggest psychosocial emotional strategies or issues is toilet training. Guilt is different than shame. Guilt is when you blame yourself that people experience when they do something wrong. So they sort of internalize it that I'm bad. Shame is a little different than guilt. It's when other people disapprove of them or they're disappointed in them. So it's when the difference between a person feeling guilty about something they've done, whereas somebody's scolding them and making them feel shameful. This is when self-concept begins to emerge as well. The person's understanding of who he or she is and incorporating self-esteem, physical appearance, personality, and other various traits into this kind of amorphous glob called self-concept. It's connected in many ways to parental confirmation. You think about the effect of self-concept with absent or with present parents. There's this thing called protective optimism. Erikson describes it as the unrealistic nature of small children. They believe they're strong, smart, attractive, powerful, and able to achieve any goal. And this confidence helps guide them into persisting, but the reality is that there are limitations. Predictive optimism consists of positive biases that help young children try new things. Willingness to try begins at about age 3, and it's a belief about the child's self-worth, and it's tied to parental confirmation. Think of children playing t-ball and the optimism of being able to play like their favorite hero. The brain maturation continues. The growth of the prefrontal cortex starts up again about ages 4 to 5, and myelation of the limbic system, especially that corpus callosum we talked about, also develops. There's improved behaviors and abilities, longer attention span, improved capacity for self-control, and social awareness and self-concept become stronger. And remember, this is the recurring theme in human development. It's about brain development. Motivation takes a turn. These are impulses that propel people to do something, and either comes from your own desires or from the social context. The difference is intrinsic motivation is something that is a drive from inside. So I like to do something because it makes me feel better. And it's seen when children invent imaginary friends. Extrinsic motivation is a drive to pursue a goal. So it arises from the need to achieve something or be rewarded. So maybe a material possession or getting an A or getting a ribbon at some kind of award. So it's not internal, it's something that's outside of them. And there's a danger in pushing external motivations as opposed to internal ones. Imaginary friends is something that happens during this time period. Make-believe friends who exist only in the child's imagination. It's not uncommon for children 3 to 7 to have this. It helps them combat loneliness and aids them in emotional regulation. This, by the way, is an example of intrinsic motivation. You're not being rewarded from outside to have an imaginary friend. Goals for emotional regulation appear to be important in certain cultures. In the U.S., it's overcoming fear, and you can read the rest of them. So that's important in this country. Psychopathology literally means an illness of the mind, and various cultures and groups within the culture have different ideas about what psychopathology is. There's recent compendiums of symptoms and disorders in the U.S. in the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic and statistical manual. Other countries use what's called ICD-10, which is the International Classification of Diseases. But essentially, they have the same diagnoses in them. There are childhood mental health problems. One of the things that happen is that kids can either do one or two things. They can either externalize problems or internalize them. Externalizing involves expressing powerful feelings through uncontrolled physical or verbal outbursts, lashing out at other kids, and breaking things. Internalizing, they turn it inward, and they usually feel guilty, ashamed, or worthless. Two different approaches to the same problem. There are hormonal differences that start to occur. Boys tend to be more aggressive, that's externalizing. Girls tend to be more anxious or internalizing. But as a rule of thumb, psychopathology is not typical in children this age. Children of both sexes usually learn to regulate their emotions as their brains mature and their parents nurture them. So it's a combination of both. Again, you can read through this, the differences in externalizing and internalizing. ADHD is far more common in boys and girls. As you look at the differences between aggressive acts between boys and girls, you'll notice the solid blue and the solid pink. In 5-year-olds, and in boys it continues to be a problem, in girls it tends to drop. And sex differences between mom, dad, and the teachers. One of the universal remedies, of course, is play. And it's something that's really important in this age group. Play is the most productive and enjoyable activity that children undertake. It's increasingly complex play. Social play is due to brain maturation. Once again, there's the brain, up with many hours of social play. Forms of play vary between age and culture. Playmates, of course, are people around the same age and same social status. And so kids need positive, playmates to be peers that help them develop positive social skills. Playmates provide practice for emotional regulation, for feeling empathic toward others, and having social understanding. Playmates are preferred play partners over parents at this point. So we went from mom and dad being on a pedestal to playmates and peers. Cultural differences occur in play. Play varies by culture, gender, and age. Some are experience dependent, reflecting culture and socioeconomic status. Before the age of electronics, young children played outside with their other kids. I can attest to that, often of both sexes, but in my case, mostly with boys, because we didn't have a lot of girls in our neighborhood. In today, in North America, kids still engage in parallel play till the age of 6. So kids on a tablet, sitting next to each other, not really interacting. There are different types of play, as Parton in 1932 identified. There's solitary play, a child playing alone, unaware of other children playing nearby. Onlooker play, a child watches another child playing. Parallel play, we just talked about children playing with similar toys in similar ways, but not together. Associative play, children interacting, observing each other, and sharing materials, but their play is not yet mutual or reciprocal, like maybe playing with Legos at the same time. And collaborative play, children playing together, creating and elaborating a joint activity, or taking turns. Here's a video on the webpage or Blackboard about play. Active play is rough and tumble. It tends to be more boys. They mimic aggression with no intention to harm the other people. It contains expressions and gestures signifying the child is just pretending. It's particularly common among boys, as I just mentioned. It advances children's social understanding, but increases the likelihood of injury. Many positive effects of cerebral cortex, of course, which is about controlling yourself. Dramatic and pretending tends to be more girls. Playing enables children to explore and rehearse social roles. As many sociologists have pointed out, like George Herbert Mead, tests their ability to explain problems, explain what they're doing. It practices regulating their emotions, developing the self-concept, and creating gender-related play themes. This just looks at video exposure over age groups, how many hours a day children tend to play. Way too much screen time. The media and play are important. Some children learn from television and educational videos, especially about how to play, especially if adults watch with them and reinforce the lessons. Children on their own rarely select educational programs or fast-paced cartoons. I can imagine that as a child watching PBS, in which characters hit, shoot, and kick. All the fun things that boys like to do. So the media can be harmful, especially when the content is violent. 6 major organizations recommend no electronic media to kids under 2 and strict limitations after that. Violent media teaches aggression, and all forms of media take time from constructive, interactive, creative activity and family interactions. There are challenges for caregivers. Creative caregiving styles, the dimensions include expression of warmth, interact with your children in a warm way, strategic strategies for discipline, communication styles, and expectations of what maturity means and what it is. This is done through parenting approaches. And there basically are 4 styles here. We'll talk about 3 of them. The authoritarian parent has high behavioral standards and strict punishment for misconduct and little communication, along those dimensions we just talked about. Most parents don't want to do this, but often can, as opposed to authoritative parent who sets limits and reinforces rules that are flexible but listens to their children. Most people want to do that. And then, of course, there's the permissive parent who's highly nurturing and communication, but provides a little discipline, guidance, or control. This is kind of the parent that wants to be the child's buddy. The 4th style that I want to mention is called a neglectful, uninvolved parent. And they probably should not have children. They tend to be indifferent toward kids, unaware of what's going on in their child's lives. They're kind of like 3 hots in a cot. They don't really provide much in the way of guidance. Maybe shouldn't even have kids. There's just an iteration of the same thing we just talked about. There are long-term effects of parenting styles. So children with authoritarian parents, kind of the authoritarian dictator, become conscientious, obedient, and quiet, but not especially happy. They feel guilty and depressed and blame themselves when things do not go well. As teenagers, they rebel and leave home, typically before the age of 20. Permissive kids are unhappy and lack self-control, especially in peer relationships. They suffer from emotional regulation problems. They're immature and lack friendships, main reason for their unhappiness. And they continue to live at home, still dependent, into early adulthood. So if you don't want your kids living with you, set some limits down with them. Authoritative parents are successful with their kids, articulate. The kids are happy with themselves and generous with others. They're well liked by teachers and peers, especially in societies in which individual initiative is something that's valued. There are problems with the research, of course, including the size of the sample, the focus of the group, the lack of insight about authoritarian parents, the lack of detail about permissive parents, and the guidance style, and of course the child's contribution to the parent-child relationship. Not all kids are the same. Remember we talked about temperament, and that varies from one child to the next. Some cultures are influenced parenting styles, including child's temperament, as I mentioned, parents' personality, and the social context. Given a multicultural, multi-contextual perspective, developmentalists hesitate to recommend a particular parenting style. You just kind of have to see what works with your temperament and with the child's temperament. Uh, in most cases, biology determines whether a child is male or female. During early childhood, sex patterns and preferences become important for children and apparent to adults. By age 2, children apply gender labels. They understand boy and girl. By age 4, children are convinced that certain toys with roles are best suited for one sex than the other. And in the U.S., sexual subtypes are obvious and rigid between the ages of 3 and 6. So we lay this down pretty early in child development during this time period. Dynamic system theory suggests that concepts of male and female behavior are affected by many developmental aspects of biology and culture and changing as humans grow older. So this is an ongoing process from birth to old age. Sex and gender differences have a biological foundation between male and female in organs, both hormones and even body type. Gender differences in roles and behaviors of male and female are more social. We have an acceptance of sexual diversity. Many preschoolers become rigid in their ideas about what's a boy and a girl, and most older children consider ethnic discrimination immoral, but they accept some sex discrimination. So they really don't have the cognitive skills to understand how those things are similar. Psychoanalytic theory, which I have a video up for you as well, includes these 5 stages. We're talking about children that are in the Oedipus stage, the phallic stage of development. Girls go through something similar called the Electra stage, and you can read about that and watch the video. Behaviorists don't really talk too much about gender development other than to talk about how it's established through reinforcement and punishment, and we learn them. So if you have parents that teach certain things, it's going to be different than other parents who might teach it differently. Social learning theory, on the other hand, says that we watch men and women behave in certain ways, and that becomes how we think about maleness and femaleness. So cognitive theories offer an explanation for strong gender identification that becomes apparent at about age 5. Gender schemas refer to a child's cognitive concept and general belief about sex differences. It's based on his or her own observations and experiences, so gender gets laid down early. Young children categorize themselves and everyone else is either male or female, and they think and behave accordingly. Sociocultural theory stresses the importance of cultural values and customs. Remember Vygotsky. Some cultures' aspects are transmitted through parents, as explained by behaviorism, but much more arise in the larger context. While humanists don't have a lot to say about development, they stress the hierarchy of needs, and the beginning with survival and then going right on up to self-actualization. Children increasingly strive to be admired by their peers, which suggests children increasingly prefer play with boys and girls because humans are social beings who want to be validated for who we are. Evolutionary theory holds that sexual attraction is crucial for humankind's most basic urge to reproduce, but this, of course, is not something that people are generally consciously aware of. It suggests young boys and girls become attracted to each other so they will be ready after puberty to find each other and ensure extension of the next generation. Maybe. This is a theory in development. Morality, of course, is a multifaceted, complex psychological process that includes affective, behavioral, and cognitive components. Children develop increasingly complex moral values, judgments, and behaviors as they mature, hopefully. Social bonds and theories of mind provide the foundation for more advanced moral action. So theory of mind is really important. We can take a nature perspective, which says it's genetic, and it occurs through the biology of humans, or nurture that extends to cultures, especially parenting, is crucial in development of morality. Pro-social behavior and antisocial, there also are videos about those, includes extending helping and kindness without any obvious benefit to oneself. And this increases between 3 and 6, like sharing. Empathy, on the other hand, is understanding the emotions and concerns of another person, especially when they're different than you are. These are all in contrast to antisocial, not pro-social behavior that is deliberately hurtful or destructive to another person. And this starts to decline at age 2. So moral development is pretty important. So you can read the captioning here. Researchers recognize 4 types of aggression that are evident in early childhood. They include instrumental aggression, being hurtful behavior toward getting something that another person has to keep it. Reactive aggression and impulsive retaliation for another person's intentional or accidental action, like verbal or physical. Relational, non-physical acts such as insults or social rejections aimed at harming the social connection between victim and other people. And finally, bullying aggression, unprovoked, repeated physical or verbal attacks, especially on victims who are unlikely to defend themselves. I think there's a question in the study sheet about the types of aggression. Here they are. What do you do about it? So discipline involves adult values, temperament, and experiences and cultural values that affect how their children misbehave. So when faced with misbehavior, the parent has options. One of them is corporal punishment. It involves physically hurting the person, such as slapping or spanking. Physical punishment increases obedience temporarily, but increases the possibility of later bullying, delinquency, and abusive behavior. So be careful with spanking. Physical punishment correlates with delayed theory of mind, we talked about, and increased aggression. Some researchers believe that physical punishment is harmless, some do not. It's very controversial. By the way, this might be a topic for a paper if someone's interested. Physical punishment increases obedience temporarily, but increases the possibility of later aggression, as you see in the Bobo doll video I put up. And many children who are spanked do not become violent adults. Other factors like poverty, temperament, are strong influences on how an adult reacts. There are types of psychological control, which are disciplinary techniques that involve threatening to withdraw love and support and relies on the child's feelings of guilt and gratitude to the parents. These are very you have to be very careful with these. Higher parental control is involved, lowered and what happens is it results in things like lowered math scores with kids, depressed children, achievement, creativity, and social acceptance, and increased relational aggression. So you can use psychological control techniques, but you have to be very careful because just like as with spanking, there are consequences to what parents do. You can use things like timeout, which are disciplinary techniques in which a child is separated from other people and activities during a specified time period. This, by the way, is behaviors view as a negative reinforcement. For some children in some cultures, sitting alone is an effective form of punishment. Sometimes it produces an angry child without changing the child's behavior. So evaluation of the effectiveness confounded by different styles, the use of timeout. So some people find timeout to be very effective. We do with our children, but some find that the children is not compliant in spite of timeout. So when you discipline, you have to do a few things, like remember theory of mind. The young children gradually come to understand things from others' viewpoint. Remember the emerging self-concept. When the sense of self is developing, sharing becomes more difficult. Remember fast mapping, where young children appear eager to talk and think, but they say more than they really understand. Explanations and discussions before and after misbehavior can be helpful with some children. And remember that children are not logical. Children may disconnect a misdeed from the punishment. So you don't want to overload them verbally. There's no simple answer. Most methods of discipline vary in consequences and effectiveness depending on the temperament of the child, the culture you live in, and the relationship you have with the child. And that's it.